Okay, so looking at the section here on lighting, the first thing that's mentioned there is different light types, and that's definitely where I'm going to start. And I will go through also a lighting setup. The other things, the lighting tools, indirect illumination, I'll probably leave until next week. I'll touch on them tonight, but I'll go into much more detail next week. But then exposure control, definitely want to spend a bit of time on that tonight because that's important with almost all the vendors you do these days. And I'm going to give examples using daylighting and I'll do an artificial lighting scene to demonstrate the other tools. So basically, we're covering things in a similar order to the way it's set out here. But like I said, I'm going to emphasise certain things and a couple of things like indirect illumination and definitely lighting effects. I'll leave until next week. Okay, so looking at the scene here, I've rendered it with the materials all set up, and you can see, well, it's probably pretty obvious here, there's a light already. I haven't put any lights into the scene, but one is there. And it's actually a default light. It's doing the ambient lighting, but there's some direct light here. You can see there's a bit of light coming through. It's actually from behind, so I've got a door here, and so there's some light coming through that door, and then there's a window here, and lights coming through there, and you can actually see the bright spots there and there. Yeah, it's a glossy floor, so that's just the material. You're right, I'd probably use too reflective, but when I put more lights into the scene, it won't look as reflective. But yeah, I think it is maybe too reflective, so I'll turn that down here. I've got it set to sorry, I started with. Sorry, just trying to click here. I started with glossy varnished wood. Satin varnished wood isn't anywhere near as reflective, but because I don't want to have to go and set my maps again, I'm just going to.
So they're sort of like automatic settings.
Yeah, yeah. And so 0.7.5. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this, and that's so it's just the glossiness. The reflectivity is actually quite low already. So, okay, so let's just try that. Maybe that a few levels lower there, is it? No? Okay, this one still looks. Oh, it's an IOR. No. I'll tell you what, I'll show you another way. So, okay, so I've got this material here. I want to replace it with this one, but I want to keep the maps that I've set up here. So I'm going to right-click on them and then copy. Going to my new material, I can paste it over the one that's there already. And I'll paste instance so it's all linked together. And then down here in the butt map, I've got to actually open that up and I can paste it here. Okay, so now to replace it in the scene, see here it's called standard 20 now. I should have given it a better name, but I'll do that now. So I'll call that timber flooring. So that's its name in the scene. I'm going to go to this material now, and again I'm going to copy and paste. So copying this text. Now I'll go to this new material, make sure I'm at the top level, and paste in that name. So these two materials have the same name, but this one here I can still tell is the one that's being used in the scene because it's got the triangles in the corner. This one's selected, and if I choose the second button there, put material to scene, it replaces this one with this one because they've got the same name. So all the instances of timber flooring in the scene get replaced with this material. Okay, so I'll render again. I know it's nothing to do with lighting, but it's definitely useful. to see that. So much less reflective flowing there. Yeah, I mean, it's got some reflections, but they're blurred, and obviously it's not as strong. Okay, so obviously you can tweak those settings, but I'll just leave that as it is. So now I want to put some lighting in, and so there's really two main types of lighting. There's natural lighting and artificial lighting. So natural lighting being from the sun, and artificial lighting being basically everything else, unless you've got unless you count fireflies and luminescent, seaweed and things like that, which does exist. You can actually get lighting effects from those things.
Phosphorus.
And phosphorus, exactly, yeah. There's all those things that create light in the natural world, but generally it's the sun. That's the main one. And other than that, light sources are generally man-made. So,
Phosphorus.
yeah.
That's what originally started giving the first reveal.
Right, yeah. No,
Because
yep.
do you want to hear a story?
Well, yeah, okay, I'll just pause the video.
It takes like 30 minutes.
Okay.
I'll be
And so the lighting effects here you can see are created by what's called default lighting, and it's in the tools menu. Oh no, sorry, they've moved it. It's under the create menu. If you want to, you can go to lights, and then under standard lights you can choose to add default lights to the scene, and that'll turn these lights into physical lights that you can select. So they are actually lights that have a position. There's one above and to the left, and one then down to the right from the objects that I've rendered there. And so they are real lights. That's why you can see an effect there. But once you put in your own lights, you lose the default lights. So if you don't add them using that method on the create menu, lights, standard lights, and then add default lights to the scene, they're gone for good once you put your own lights into the scene, which is a good thing. You normally don't want them. So on the create panel, you've got geometry and then shapes, which we've had a bit of a look at, and then lights. So you've got two basic kinds of lights, photometric and standard, but also under systems, you've got daylight and sunlight. So that's how you make your suns, and I'll come back to that and go right through those in a moment. Oh, and I do have a sun. I was getting a bit worried about that. I thought my default lighting was a bit too bright. Can't delete that, I suppose. Right, now I'm just going to render again, but I'm going to also check my exposure control. Yeah, that's on. Also, because I just want to show you how it'll probably look when you start to set your scenes up. It won't maybe look like what I've been showing you, because I still have a few settings that I need to put back to their defaults. That's more like it. It's a bit overdone, and I might even, yeah, there's something going wrong there. Yeah, just a little bit. Got no exposure control. Yeah, it's way overexposed. Now, it shouldn't look that bad, so let me just check. I've got a few other things I should have maybe checked beforehand. Final gather, I've got that set a bit too high. And yeah. There we go. Okay, so that's a more even more basic setup than what I had earlier. So now I can start putting in the lighting from scratch and take you right through the process. All right, so I might start with a nighttime scene because they're a bit easier to set up in a way, even though it actually takes longer. It's easier to understand, I think. So if you make a light, I'll do it in the top viewport from the lights panel. You've got to choose first whether you want photometric or standard. And what I'm going to recommend is that you use photometric for most of your lighting, just because they're the lights with the most features, the most options. Standard lights are sometimes easy to understand, and if you look through the notes, there's a good explanation of all the different kinds of lights. So going through here, it talks about the setup that you can use for the interface, which we looked at earlier, and then you've got an explanation of the different light types. Now, I will start with that as well, but then I'll spend most of the time on photometric lights. So in the list there, you probably won't have V-Ray, but you'll always have photometric and standard. And you may have other things as well. So I'll just start with standard, just because it's easiest to explain the different light types and basic principles using these standard lights. And the one I'll start with is Omni. So Omni simply means omnidirectional. In other words, it emits light in all directions. So with Omni, I'm just going to click a point, and I've made a light.
So you don't necessarily need a light fitting?
No, in fact, you need to make that separately. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Okay, so to see that in the, well, I can see it in the camera viewport, but it's on the ground. So I'm just going to right-click to finish making the light, and I'll lift it up off the ground, and you can see there it's set above the ground, a certain height, 1200. I'll lift it up higher in a moment, but what I'll do now is render again. Okay, so you can see now it's rendering with that light source. Now, am I getting shadows from it? Probably not. It's a bit slow when it gets here. Oh, there we go. Just took it a minute. There we go. You can see it reflected, but there are no shadows. So let's have a look at what's happening there. Okay, so going to the modify panel now, I've got all the light's properties. And it's a, you can see an Omni light there, and the intensity is 1, and the shadows are turned off. So I'm going to turn shadows on right away, and I'll take the multiplier down just so you can see the effect of the light more clearly. I'll make the multiplier there 0.3. With standard lights, that's the main way you control the intensity. It's not in watts or lumens or anything like that. It's just a multiplier value, with 1 being the normal brightness and less than that being less bright, more obviously being brighter. So that's toned lighting right down, but you can see it's still emitting the light evenly in all directions. I get shadows cast from that point in the middle where the light is.
So all the other lights disappear now?
That's right, exactly, yeah.
Is that showing that the door frame is very reflective?
The glass is, yeah, the glass there is, yeah, very reflective. Yeah.
Oh, in behind there, everywhere.
Oh, there, yes, it is, yeah, it is a fairly, yeah, reflective material, yeah.
So if you have the light fitting,
Yeah.
you like add like a certain object?
Yeah, different approaches. You definitely need to model the lampshade itself, but for the light source, say the bulb, or essentially, there are different ways. And normally, if you're using photometric lights, you've got options in the light itself to turn that on.
So with the light source, do you put like
No, yeah, exactly. You do. Yeah, and I'll do that in a minute. But with this one, they're an older kind of light, and it works a bit differently. So Omni lights are good for background lighting, but they're not very good as your main light source because they just emit evenly in all directions. You can't really control it. I'll put it down to say 0.1, and I'm going to turn on the decay. I'm going to make that inverse square, which is actually what lights in the real world use. So we should now have a fairly dim light. But much brighter in the centre. Okay, so anyhow, Omni lights are good for general ambient light and just your main diffuse light in some cases, but a bit hard to control, even though they are one of the simplest lights. So delete that one. Then you've got spotlights, and so you've got target and free spot. They're basically the same. I'll show you there isn't much difference between them. I'll make a target spot first. So with a target spot, you just click to place the light and then drag to place the target. Just like anything else, you can move it, and so to do that, just right click to finish the tool, and using the gizmo there, you can move the light. So I've moved the target, also I moved the light source so it's closer to the target. And now in the camera viewport, I'm just going to lift it up so you can see the light source above the target. So because sure, so when you right click, you can choose select light target. That's an easy way, or you can just click on it. It's a separate object. So I can move that around, and that makes the light point in different directions. So I can point it at a table or something. So at this stage, it's probably going to be handy to see what the light's doing in the viewport. So it can be handy here to have hardware shading turned on, and so you do that right-clicking on the graphics mode in the viewport. So in this case, it's on smooth and highlights, and that's what it says there if you can't read it. And then you've got the lighting and shadows sub-menu. So it's got to be on illuminate with scene lights, and you can see it's trying to do it, but it's using software shading. I'm going to right-click there again and turn on hardware shading. And now I can see, it might be hard for you to see, but I can see the effect of the light there. I'm going to go back, and under lighting and shadows, I'm going to check that enable shadows is turned on. Now the light is fairly dim, so I'm going to go to my properties panel. I can't see the light's properties because I've actually got the target selected, so I'm going to right click again, and you'll see there's an option there on this quad menu that comes up to select the light. So again, shadows are turned off. Intensity is set to what I had it before, so I'll put that back to 1, and you can see now the light effect much more clearly. So spotlights are actually a lot like Omni lights. The obvious difference being that they're targeted. Even free spots are targeted, and I'll show you in a minute how that works. Okay, so that target obviously is a point set out from the light itself, and then it emits from that point in a cone shape targeted on that target point. So you control the cone using the spotlight parameters here, and you've got 2 parameters basically. You've got the hotspot and the fall off. So actually I might just move this away from the table so you can see it a bit more clearly. So again, I can right click, select target, and just bring that around. So I'll bring it right in front of the camera there. Okay, so again, right click to select light, and so now when I adjust the hotspot, so the hotspot is the brightest part of the light. If I adjust that and bring it down, it's going to make the bright area smaller, but it's also going to increase the transition between the brightest part and the darkest part.
Can you increase the transition?
Well, that's what I've done. So The fall off there is that area where it is going to reach nothing. So the bigger the distance between those, the more you fall off, or the more the transition. With a small distance between them, you get a hard edge to your light because there isn't much of a transition. So rendering now. Now I've got some sort of ambient light here because it shouldn't be doing that.
Can you have a light source sitting in your project and just switch it up?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure, definitely. Now I've only got this light, so there's just something funny going on in the scene because I have used it to demonstrate lots of things in the past, and there's just something obvious I've forgotten. Oh no, I suppose we've got Final Gather on, so it is doing something more than I expected it to, actually. But let's make sure I'm not using any other options here. I'm really tempted to take this into another file. Yeah, why not? Because that way you'll see it the way it really would be when you first start doing it. So I'll just quickly do one little thing. Yep. Okay. So I'm just going to reset and bring this into a new file. It's just going to be annoying if you go to do it yourselves and it doesn't look like what I've been showing you. Okay, so everything's in my new scene now, and I can simply set the camera view. There we go. That's more like it. And well, still won't know till I render, but it's looking good. So there we go. Got the light in there, and shadows. Here we are. So I'll just do a quick test render here. That's more like it. Okay, so there was something else doing some lighting there, and I had tweaked that scene a lot to get different things to happen, so I've forgotten what I did at some stage to put some extra ambient light there, but that's how it look normally when you first put a light in with nothing else happening. Okay, so looking at the spotlight there, it's also got decay set to none. So in theory, this light bounces around infinitely, but Final Gather will only take it so far, and I'll take you through that later or next week when we look at indirect illumination. But there is actually bounce lighting going on here. Just to prove that to you, I'll increase this effect. And I've gone and rendered the wrong viewport. Let's just do that again. So might be a bit hard for you to see on those screens, but let's just increase the light's brightness as well, just so it's a bit clearer to you. So can you see there how the ceiling is receiving some light because there is bounce lighting. It's not just the floor, but even so, it's not receiving a lot of light, and that's because this is a targeted light. Let's put that back to 1. And just to compare it again to an Omni, I'll put that in the scene. And I'll leave the spot there, but I'll turn it off. So that's what the OmniLight does on its own. Huge difference. Even though they're the same intensity. Right, so that means not only is the OmniLight harder to control and emitting, light in all these different directions, it means things take longer to render. So the spotlights, even though they've got more controls, more settings, because it's targeted only in a particular area, it means there's less light, so less time to render. So the only other major type of light, firstly, I should just show you the other kind of spotlight. So you've got spotlights with targets, and then you would have seen on the Create panel, you've got free spots. Now I can make this target spot into a free spot simply by turning targeted off. You can see it doesn't change the light in any way. It'll still render exactly as it did before. So the only difference is that I don't have a target. Oops, wrong viewport. I don't have a target that I can select, as I did before. So to change the direction of the light, instead of selecting the target and moving it around, I won't wait for this to finish, I'll just cancel that. Instead of selecting the target, to change the direction the light points, you simply rotate it. Okay, so it's just a different way of controlling the light, that's all. And at any stage you can turn the target on and then, okay, when you rotate the light, it won't do anything because the rotation is basically controlled by the target. So that's all the target does. Right, so the only other major kind of light, I'm going to delete this one, the only other major kind of light is a direct light. So looking at all these different kinds here, so target spot, free spot we've looked at, OmniLights we've looked at, I'll get to skylights and these others in a minute. But the other major kind I said is a direct light, and again you've got target and free direct. Now, when you look at a direct light, I'll make a target direct. You can see it's a lot like a spotlight in that you've got a light source and a target. So I'm going to use move here, bring that up, and it can even look like a spotlight if you're not looking closely when you render. It's easy to think that it is a spotlight. Shadows on, and I've got it a bit high there, I think. Should be doing more than that. What's it hitting? There you go. So I'm going to do something anyway. So if I render now, you'll see it's going to cast shadows into an area just like the spotlight. The big difference is that it doesn't cast from a point out to a cone shape. It uses a cylinder. So that simply means the light rays are parallel. And there's a really obvious light source that uses parallel rays, the sun. And that's really what direct lights are for. They're to simulate the sun. So if you want a light that you can control directly and change all the settings, but that still looks and works like the sun, you can use direct lights. That's really what they're there for. They're also handy for moonlight. That's about it. So you probably won't need to use those very often, but I actually do use them for moonlight quite a lot. I very rarely use them for sunlight because there's a better way of making sunlight. So other than these basic, really three kinds of lights, spots, directs and omnis, then you've got skylights. Now skylights, believe it or not, are really useful, but mainly with Scanline. In other words, the old rendering engine. With Mentor, they're of limited use. Now, believe it or not, they still are useful occasionally with Mentor, but they're really more something that is from the old days of Scanline rendering when you needed an extra light source that handled the indirect lighting. And so don't worry too much about those. I'll try and give you some examples, how you can use those with Mentor Ray later on, but it's kind of an extra bonus thing we can look at later. And if you're wondering what skylight means, it is the light from the sky. Might not be obvious, but the sky is a light source. Right, so when you've got light from the sun, You've got the direct light coming directly from the, the yellow disk in the sky that you see. But then you've got light that's diffused through the atmosphere, that makes it blue. Well, everything apart from the blue light is absorbed in the atmosphere. And so you've got that less intense light that comes from that less bright, or less bright than the sun part of the atmosphere, the blue sky that you see. It lights things up, and so that's what this handles. In the old days, that's what it was used for, especially. And you can still do it with mental array, but there's other ways, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Okay, so skylights can be handy, but don't worry too much about them right now. But then also below that, you've got these other two lights that are used a lot with mental array, MR area omnis and MR area spots. So you might have noticed with the spotlight I made earlier, in fact, I'll just see if I can go back and get it back there. I shouldn't have deleted it. There we are. Okay, so I'll just try and accentuate the shadows there. Yeah. Okay, so the light's casting shadows, but notice how hard edged they are. That doesn't look very realistic. Now, I might also just put in a light omni here so that we've got a general light source, but I'll make that very dim. Still a bit too dim. Bit too bright. Really varies from scene to scene because there's a bit light bouncing around off the geometry here. And I'm going to increase my bounces to 1 so I get a bit more bounce lighting. Okay, that might do. Alright, so I've got shadows here cast from the spotlight that's up here, and they're very hard edged. Now, that's because of the shadow type, which is, you might have already noticed, it's set to something called ray traced shadows. And they're very accurate. So the problem's not actually the shadow type, it's why it's happening, but that's not the real problem. I'll just let that finish. Okay, so looking at this here, ray traced shadows. Now, there are other shadow types you can use that will give you a softer edge to your shadows, but that's really fudging it. The fundamental problem is that ray traced shadows are very accurate, so they're using the light source and projecting from that light source, which is up here somewhere, to the edge of the object, and very accurately working out where the edge of that table is. And the light source is an infinitely small point. That's why we're getting hard edge. So instead of using a target spot, which is a regular standard light, I'll turn that off, I'll leave it there. Oh no, so that's my omni. So that's my spot, turn that off. I'm going to use an MR area spot. So I'm going to click and drag to just place it roughly the same way. Bring it up to roughly the same height. So exactly the same settings. Now, what brightness did I have this one? Yep, just 1. Okay, so intensity, exactly the same. Right, so far it's exactly the same as the other light, except maybe the hotspot might be slightly different, but looks close enough. Okay, so all of those settings are exactly the same as a regular spotlight, but then you've got something extra down the bottom. You've got area light parameters that you don't have with a regular spotlight. and there you can choose to emit from, in the case of a spotlight, either a rectangle or a disc. In the case of OmniLights, you can actually emit from a volume, so a sphere or a cylinder. So I'll set it to disc, and then I'll set the radius to be fairly large, so you'll see some nice soft, really soft shadows. So because it's emitting the light from an area, we're going to get shadows crossing over each other. In other words, the edge of the shadows is going to be soft. And that adds a lot of realism.
So did that just make the source of the light lighter?
Exactly. Yeah. Doesn't change the light intensity, it's all to do with the shadows. But you can see it takes a bit longer to render once you start adding in those more advanced effects. But you can see right away there, soft edges. Makes a big difference to realism. Okay, so also there on the same panel you can see area omnis, same thing as area spots, except they apply, like I said, a volume to an OmniLight. But again, it's all about the shadows. So those are two lights that you can only use with vent array, but then also photometric lights, generally used with vent array. And they're the ones I'm going to focus on mainly throughout the rest of the course. I'll be encouraging you to use these mainly. It does help though if you understand the older light types, but definitely you can, or these in a way supersede the standard lights. Right, so target lights and free lights are the only two types of photometric lights. In some ways you can think of target lights like spotlights and free lights like OmniLights, but there's a bit more to it than that. They're actually interchangeable. So free lights don't have a target, but again, just like a spot, you can turn the target on and off. And those different types, spot, omni, and direct, actually become the distribution option that you have here, and you'll see this in a minute. So I'm just going to create one. Free light. You can see as soon as you do it, you should get this message. If you don't, then you need to actually go and look and find out what's happening with your exposure. But you should get it. So first thing, when you're using photometric lights, doesn't matter which kind you create, target or free. And by the way, just forget about MR Sky portals for now. So I'm just going to be looking at target and free lights. And then yes, so what it's telling you is that you don't have exposure control turned on, but that you should be using it with photometric lights. So I'm going to say yes, I do want that on. And then because it's a free light, kind of like an Omni, you just click to place it. And then you can see, well, it's doing something, but maybe that's a bit bright. So I'll have a look at that in a minute. But the first thing before I do that is to lift that off the ground, so it's up at the height of a normal light. And I'm going to put this one close to the ceiling. Unlike the standard lights I was looking at earlier, where you're really just using them to get the look you want, with photometric lights, you need to treat them more like they're actual lights in the real world. So I want some lights on the ceiling here that behave like real ceiling lights would in the real world. So they've got to be up at that height, and I'm going to get it roughly centered. So in this room, I probably would have a pendant light somewhere up there, and then the rest of the lighting I'll try and do with those lamps. And that might be even over here further. We'll see how it goes, but I'll try that. Okay, so it's still very bright. If I go to render now, it's going to be, I know, too bright. Now, that's not necessarily to do with the brightness of the light. Could be part of the problem, but the other issue is exposure, and so I'll go through that in a minute. But first thing is to look at the light properties again, and you can see here, free lights have some of the things that look like the controls you have with standard lights. So at the top, you've got the option to turn them on and off, the kinds of shadows, So I want shadows on here, and again, ray trace shadows. I'm just going to recommend that you use ray trace shadows for everything. They generally work the best if you use the other advanced options like the area shadows. So just like the MR area lights, you've got the option to emit from shapes, but you've got all the options here. You don't just have a couple. So you can, emit from a line or a rectangle for fluorescent lights and things like that, or a disc or sphere cylinder. So I'll just go for a rectangle, and I'll take that size down. I'll make it about 200 square, or a bit less, maybe 150 or so. That should give, reasonable shadows. The light's not visible when rendering though, so I won't see that rectangular shape. But if you do want to see it, you can, in the viewport, actually see the area that the light's coming from. So you see if I change this, that changes the actual light emission shape. And if you want to have that visible, you can. So if you tick this option here, when you're looking at that light source, you'll see a bright, a bright white rectangle of light on the ceiling. So I might actually do a render where we can see that in a minute. But for now, I'll just leave that turned off. And again, I'll just do a quick render. But you see, it's still going to be too bright. Okay, so first thing, before I even check the intensity, is to look at the exposure. So under the rendering menu, you've got exposure control. You're going to spend a lot of time working with this. When I said yes to turn on exposure control, what it did there is set MR photographic exposure control. So that should be set already, as long as you've said yes to the question it asks when you make your first photometric light. Now, if you know your exposure values, you might know already that this is about right for a nighttime scene. 2 is generally what you'd be using. Render preview here just puts the render that I've got there into this preview window, which means you can see it as you make changes. And so just so you can see what the exposure control does, first I'll set it to some presets. So starting with outdoor daylight clear sky, and these might be familiar to you from Revit. It's going to be black because that's clamped the light right down. It's got the exposure control I'd need if I was rendering with sun. So that's 15, and that's a good value to remember as well. So between 2 and 15 is the normal range. 2 for the darker scenes, maybe a little bit lower, but generally around 2 for the darker scenes, 15 for the brightest scenes. And they can go a little bit out either side of those ranges. They're the basic range. Okay, so the next one, indoor daylight, is 10. You can see there, I can start to see the scene. So as the exposure value comes down, you see more light. But that's not correct. I mean, I've got as much light as I'd have during the day. So that means my light source is still very bright. So that tells me something. Going now to outdoor nighttime, it goes down to 3. And it's too bright there. So again, my light source probably is too bright. And definitely the one we had before, indoor nighttime, is too bright. The exposure value I'd probably be using here, if I was stuck with that light intensity, would be around 6 or 7, or even a bit higher, maybe even 8. But we shouldn't have to do that. I know for a nighttime scene lit only by artificial lighting, the exposure value should be about 2, maybe 3 at most. So going back to my light source.
So we're talking about when someone takes a photo with it can
Yeah.
only talk about
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And you can actually see the shutter speed there. So here it's 1/0.063 seconds. Yeah. And so, yeah, there were different ways you can control exposure. You can either use the shutter speed, or the f-stop, or the film speed. So, and the exposure value is just, an expression of one of those. Normally they actually use the f-stop, but here they're using the shutter speed. So my light source is very bright, but it's very hard to get a baseline on how bright or not the light source is until you know what your exposure value is. It's like, you know, looking into a room, until your eyes have adjusted, you don't know how bright the light is or not, or you don't know how bright the light should be or not. So here you can see the light's intensity, and it's not just in a multiplier. So that multiplier was kind of an abstract value. This here is using real lighting units. So you've got a choice of either lumens, candelas, or lux. Now, have any of you come across lux before?
Yeah.
It still does my head in. I use it. It's my favourite way of doing it, but I've still sometimes got to think, how's it actually working? It's tricky because it's light intensity over an area, which is hard to work with. So at first, it's probably easier to use lumens. Once you know, you look up a light source, and you can actually get lumens from most manufacturers. Candelas aren't used as much these days, they're the older way, but candelas and lumens both work in the same way, in that they don't worry about just the spread of the intensity. Lux, you can see, gives you an extra option that you've got to worry about. There's an extra setting there. So to begin with, and honestly, most of the time I still probably would use lumens and candelas to start with before I fine-tune with lux. And it's fine. It's a general measure of intensity that works pretty well. If you see that this is greyed out, this field here, which is where you set your intensity, it's usually because the option down below is turned on, which basically uses a percentage multiplier. It still tells you the result in the units you've chosen. So I could set this to 50, and it would be 50% of 1500, which is obviously 750. But I think, well, why not just leave that off and type in 750 if that's what you want. And you can just switch interchangeably between lumens and candelas. Candelas is, like I said, probably the easiest one to relate to at first because it's based on candles. So 750 is roughly equal to 750 candles. Lumens, a more modern unit that is based on some metric thing. But watts is the one you want to avoid. You can't even work with watts. I'll show you there is a little trick you can use to get a baseline with watts, but watts doesn't specify intensity. It specifies the energy use, and some lights are more efficient than others. So that's why it's going to be used lumens or candelas. Okay, but also you can start with templates. So a lot like the Arken Design materials, they realised a long time ago that some of these things get pretty technical because I haven't even gone into the really techy part yet. So you don't have to worry so much about that. You've got these templates which get you started and do a lot of really high-end stuff without you even needing to know all the fiddly stuff. So say if you want a 75 watt incandescent bulb, there it is. It's a quite an orange light. You can fine-tune that, but it is automatically giving you the colour, the distribution, and lots of other really good things.
How many candela?
95. Yep. And then the emit from's been set back to point, so I'd need to set that to a sphere or something if I wanted it to have soft shadows again. But now when I render, you can see with an exposure value of 2, it's got a much more realistic light level.
So that's gone so yellow.
Yeah, it's
What were the other ones pretending to be?
just they were just white light. They weren't meaning to be any particular light source, but yeah, white in the colour. So you can always adjust this if you think it's too yellow. I mean, incandescent light is very yellow, but again, your eyes adjust for this as well, which is where it gets tricky. But sorry. So I'll cancel this. A couple of ways you can adjust for it because it does look too yellow. You've got the filter colour, so you can put in the complementary colour, which will take it down. So if you put in blue or cyan, that will tone it down. But the other way is to adjust the Kelvin, and that's the real reason it's yellow. So if you bring that Kelvin value up, it's going to be more white. And so I'll render again now. Okay, so that's taken away most of the yellow. But it's still probably, I mean, depends how technically correct you want to be, but with incandescent, it's not bad to have a little bit of yellow. But yeah, it does start very yellow, more than you might want it to be. Alrighty, so then there are other lights that you have in that list of templates. So the halogen spot, for example. Really interesting to see this one because you can see there it looks kind of like the spotlights I had before, but it's not doing anything here. And it's all because the hotspot there starts off at 1. So again, so this is where it helps if you know those more basic lights, because usually you have a lot of access to all those settings in just this one photometric light, whether it's free or targeted. The settings are basically the same. So here, bringing up the hotspot and adjusting the fall-off angle. Going to get something similar to what I had before. So lots of really good distributions. I'll just show you a couple more. And so you've got things like the fluorescent distributions. And what they do is use a web file. So this is something you can look for on the web. That's not what web means there, but and again you can change the emit from here, but that again is mainly for the shadows. So I'm going to go emit from line, and sorry, and then my shadows will yep, that'll work. Will look like they're coming from a fluorescent. A little bit bright maybe. So I'll bring that down. And so one last thing before I go into the web files a bit more, you've got these different illuminance presets which give you different colours. So if you've worked with filters in Photoshop or even just camera filters, these can tie in with that. So anyhow, the light though is a bit bright there, so I want to go back to the intensity. So I've gone past it. There we are. So it's 1600 at the moment. So it's how much are that at 1000? Okay, so lots of different things you can set with those lights. So just that one photometric light type gives you lots of really good options. And then, very last thing I'll show you about the artificial lights, and I'll probably finish up here. I'll go through natural lighting next week. Okay, so I'll cancel that. And so really important, web files. So clicking here, you can see that you've got these IES files that come with the program. So they give you a few to get you started, and just like the material libraries, they live in the program folder. So wherever your 3ds Max folder is, where you've installed it, you'll find scene assets and then photometric. So really handy, much easier than trying to do it yourself. So they give you a preset distribution, and it is pretty technical setting that up. So much easier if you can just find a file. And there's a thing called the Illumination Engineering Society, IES. They set up this format years ago, and you can get them from most manufacturers. And so it gives you all the technical information about the way the light distribution works, and then you just load it in here. It's that easy. So it's just a fantastic thing. And
They're like blocks.
kind of, yeah, except it's actually just a bunch of numbers that tell the program, how this light should work. And it's only with photometric lights that you can use them. So you make your photometric light first, and then here you load it in to the the distribution there.
So with the standard lights, there seems to be more of a range of things you can do.
Yeah, it seems that way, but there's actually a lot more with photometric. Everything you can do with a standard light, you can do with photometric.
Okay. So
Uh,
then you have the ones the skylight sort of.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, now maybe I'll just quickly show you that. I'm going to show you that when I do natural lighting, but I'll do that next week.
Direct light.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So.
A parallel.
Oh, yeah. Now you can't do direct lights with photometric lights.
Zero the banner.
Yeah, they're meant to be based on real lights. But what you can do is, sorry, under systems, you can make a daylight system. So a daylight system is kind of the photometric equivalent of a direct light and does a whole lot more. You'll see next week when we do that. It's a full day and sky system. Yeah. Now, one thing though you might have noticed there, the light wasn't coming up. I was seeing the bits of light where it was hitting the ceiling, but I couldn't see the light source itself in the reflections. So I'm going to turn this option here, light shape visible when rendering. And I might actually make it so I can see the light source directly as well as in the reflections just by getting a camera that that's looking that way. So I'll just change my view a bit. Okay, so there's the light source up there. Maybe a little bit too close to the ceiling, so I'll bring it down so it doesn't get lost in the reflections. And very bright. I want to tone that right down. And just as a tip, dimmer is usually better. You want lots of subtle lighting, not a few really bright lights. Still too bright. Okay, that might be alright. Okay, so it won't come up until the end, but you will see it. So it should look like a... Oh, now I've only got it online, so I should have had it on cylinder. But that's okay, I can change that afterwards. Yeah, so it's not, a line is very thin, so cylinder, and that's better. So it's a bit too thick there though. So let's turn that down. There we go. Stick with me, clicked on a new program. Okay, so now the light shape does affect the distribution. It's overall not any brighter, but this area it looks brighter just because of the increased area that it's being emitted from. But you can start to see there the actual light shape. Now, this again shows dimmer is better. Light sources in the real world, when they're very close to another object, are extremely bright because of that whole idea of logarithmic decay. But anyhow, you can still see the light source there is visible. But here, I would definitely tone that down if I had nothing protecting it, no lampshade or anything. And so anyhow, don't be afraid to take your lighting levels right down. So here, let's try 90 or something. So nice and dim, and then you can really see the nice spread onto other things. And if it's not bright enough in other areas, add more light sources. It looks better having more uneven lighting, I suppose, or lighting that's diffused over larger areas. So I'd say that's still too bright on the ceiling there, and again, tone it down. When that happens, it looks much better, and it's more like the way you do lighting in the real world. So 60 or something here, like. There we go. So that's better. So you just want to avoid those really bright highlights. And it is hard when you've got bright materials, but it's something you've just got to adjust for. And so even though the other areas look fairly dark, they're still receiving a fair amount of light. Once I've got other light sources in here, this might be enough. Once I've got those 3 lamps with light sources in there. But otherwise there are other tricks I can use to brighten up the whole scene. I'll show you more about that next week. But I better get this video producing or it'll never finish.